You're hearing this show on a consumer electronics device. Few Americans even get through breakfast each morning without interacting with consumer electronics. It's a big industry, and it has mixed feelings about the Trump-Musk-DOGE approach to the government. The CEO of the Consumer Technology Association, Gary Shapiro, joins me now. Gary, good to have you back.
Thank you, Tom. Happy to be here with you.
And you have expressed the idea that many of the cutback or the trimming or the efficiency drives of the DOGE are worthy, but you're not comfortable with the way they're going about it. Elaborate for us.
Well, thanks. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of myself as much as I am our board and the Consumer Technology Association.
Fair enough.
The budget deficit, annual deficit, and the growing debt has been a source of concern for our organization for a couple of decades now. We believe that the biggest threat to the U.S. economy and our future is the fact that we have this growing debt. It's about $36 trillion at 5% interest, which we pay each year now, while we're paying more in interest than we pay for our entire national defense. And so we feel that, as do a number of other leaders, this is the biggest threat to our long-term future as a nation. We do not ask the government for money for ourselves. We ask it for other things, but we don't ask it for the industry. We didn't even get involved in the efforts to get chip manufacturing in the U.S. So given that background, this is a core position of ours, that we believe the debt is a problem, we welcome any effort to try to cut the debt. And the DOGE effort is certainly significant and fast and quick and blunt. The concern that any American, I'm sure, would have with that is that the government executives branch and the people who work for the government are really good at what they do, and they're knowledgeable, and they probably could do a better job of cutting themselves and helping directing DOGE than the DOGE people coming in from afar and just reading a little bit of data and making big decisions about futures livelihood, ignoring their skills and what they bring to the table, which are irreplaceable. It's a blunt instrument which requires a series of scalpels, but the scalpels could be guided by those already in government.
Or it could even be guided with some hatchets, but you just need to make a careful wedge first before you hit the spot.
Absolutely. President Clinton cut more than the DOGE people cut, but he did it in a way where there was more consensus building and careful analysis and thought, rather than get the richest guy in the world who's running 5 other companies to come in and bring his team in and just basically cut.
And when you talk about the debt, which is rising fast, I think spending on interest on the debt exceeds spending on national defense. They aren't talking about the real drivers of debt long term, which is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security spending. And nobody says, let's cut that tomorrow. But nobody's talking about a solution in the long term to bend the curve of that spending, which would really help.
I wouldn't say nobody. I've written a number of columns about that. I mean, there's a whole
nobody in Congress, I should say.
No, there's some proposals that sporadically come up. I mean, the challenge is that both parties are somewhat irresponsible. Is if one party says anything, they accuse the others of cutting Social Security, when the reality is cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security requires just being a little bit smarter about it. For example, the age limitations, which I'm now way past at 65.
That makes 2 of us.
No, I mean, those were set, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. And we live longer now, thankfully, so we can work longer. There's nothing wrong with that. We just have to acknowledge it in our Social Security. In healthcare, there's a whole range of things. My wife is a doctor, and I've learned a lot about healthcare. And there's a whole bunch of ways we could be smarter. For example, our medical system now doesn't consider frequency of treatment. It doesn't really consider efficacy in a relative way. It just says something works or it doesn't. Even if it works in the most minor way and costs $1 zillion, it's something doctors can perform. And it also has incentives in the wrong place, so that doctors are doing some things like probably over-doctoring. The fact is the healthcare system in the United States is the most expensive by any measure in the world, and by some measures has, especially for common things, has the least. The results are not among the most favorable of the developed world. So we can do things differently, and we should be looking at those.
We're speaking with Gary Shapiro. He is CEO of the Consumer Technology Association. And I wanted to get your take on tariffs, because the CES represents companies from all over the world, really. Probably the greatest percentages of items displayed at CES are made in China. They might be designed anywhere in the world. There's some consumer electronics made in Europe. There's some made here and so on. And so it's probably the most international, or at least as international as any industry. What's the take on tariffs? You can see a lot of two-edged swords there.
Well, the Consumer Technology Association is happy because the CES is the most significant global event for innovation and technology. It has over 4,300 exhibitors at our last edition in January, and that's over 30 football fields of exhibit space. Among the exhibitors, there are several Chinese, certainly, but there also is a large contingent from other Asian countries like Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and others. And there's also, it's a showplace for automobiles, healthcare technology, and other things, a lot of which is not made in China, actually. Our position on tariffs is very clear as an organization. We think tariffs are fine if they're selectively used and they're somewhat reciprocal, but to use them as a blunt instrument day in, day out to try to get policy, especially when the United States worked so hard and made a decision about relationship with China, permanent normal trade relations in the 90s, as well as made the decisions twice now, including President Trump negotiating the last deal with Canada and Mexico. Companies made huge investments in Canada and Mexico on the basis of these decisions. Here we are at an almost full employment economy with our president wholesale trying to eliminate anyone who's here illegally, including about half the construction trade. And we have to rebuild California, LA area. We have to, if the interest rates go down, we'll have a rebuilding thing. We have a shortage of housing. And now we're saying we have to manufacture when we lack the skills, the factories, the designers to manufacture. And there's two voices in the administration. One voice, President Trump, and the vice president talks about all the great jobs that are going to be created. The jobs that are going to be created will be in construction of these new factories because they'll be pretty much unmanned. The Commerce Secretary actually even said that. Very few jobs will be created because these will be highly sophisticated factories if we're going to be able to build them. The concept that we could build these in 4 years or 5 years or 10 years or even 15 years and become self-sufficient is absurd. It's just not factual and ignores reality. What is a reality and should be a priority is what the vice president talked about when he talked about shipbuilding in the United States. He talked about things that are necessary for our national defense. We should be focusing on what's necessary for national security and benefit from the fact that we have tremendous amount of imports at a low cost. That's a benefit to the American consumer. If you're going to, the worst thing you could do for people at the lower end of the financial spectrum is impose taxes or tariffs on products. It hits the poorest people the hardest. It's inflationary. Inflation is our biggest problem. We just talked about interest rates and the national debt. If you want to bring down our interest payments, you have to bring down inflation. Imposing tariffs is definitely inflationary. And President Trump has found the few economists which would agree with him. 99.9% of economists feel the tariffs across the board are wrong, they're harmful to the economy, and they're inflationary.
And just a detail question on that manufacturing and bringing it back to the United States. Clearly, the RCA Indianapolis television plant will never come back making furniture with TV tubes in it. But what about automotive manufacturing? You mentioned automotive is a big part of CES because cars are basically bundles of electronics, on wheels now. Is that related, do you feel, to the national economy and national security? Because in the grand old days of Detroit, the biggest driver of the economy of plastics, of steel, of coatings, of glass, of all these commodities, rubber, was the automotive industry. What's your feeling on whether it matters that fewer and fewer cars might be made in the United States, especially electric?
Well, we made a decision just a few years ago under President Trump that we would work with Canada and Mexico as our allies and partners. And products could be made there were certain content requirements that would be made in Mexico, Canada, or the U.S. An entire distribution system has been built up in infrastructure in the last 5 years, which relies on our friends to the north, Canada and Mexico, and the U.S. And we have factories in all three locations. And now for President Trump to come in and reverse what he has done is so disruptive to the auto industry that you can see the impact on the stocks they're having. And the fact that some of this, although Tesla is a member of ours, Elon Musk has had a Tesla, you have to look at that and say, what's the connection there? And why is this being done in such a way that's so harmful to the domestic U.S. auto industry? The auto industry is not pushing for these tariffs at all. GM and Ford, Stellantis, the big three, and even some of those that have been encouraged to be in the U.S., like Toyota and BMW that have manufacturing factories, you don't hear them clamoring for tariffs. Tariffs are inflationary, they're taxes, and the way President Trump has chose to put them on and off, and they're just so disruptive that I've never been so pessimistic about the state of not only the U.S. economy, but now we're affecting the world economy. These decisions on tariffs are deadly at this point. And they're just nonsensical. And like we're talking about getting fentanyl from Canada when less than 25 pounds was recovered in the last couple of years. I mean, this is crazy. Fentanyl is not the problem. We export more cocaine to Canada, and they're concerned about that. And they're a great ally, as is Mexico. I actually have a petition on change.org